All right, welcome to Northwestern Voices. We've got a very special guest today, and before we get into that, I'm just going to ask you to simply like and subscribe to the podcast. Okay, so
just like the pros say,
just like the pros say, and just
like...
because Caleb has been giving me a hard time about not saying that at the beginning of every podcast, I actually made a separate note that has nothing on it but to say Seth Keysor, like and subscribe.
Oh, certainly.
So,
well done. Well done.
I gave away who the guest was. The guest is Seth Keysor, by the way, in case anybody doesn't recognize this man. Rising from the hardscrabble railroad town of Valley City, North Dakota.
Yeah, go Highliners.
And a graduate of is it UND or NDSU?
NDSU.
NDSU.
Well, actually, no. So I took the often not considered like 9-year trek through college.
Okay.
So I went to NDSU.
Yeah.
Then I went to Valley City State University, and then I went to Central Lakes College, and then I went to St. Cloud State University. So I have an associate's with Central Lake College, and then a bachelor's in elective studies, which is code for I wanted to take all my classes online from St. Cloud State.
Okay. So you have a doctrine or a degree in election.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. A degree in election, yeah.
So you're actually a Husky then.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Go Huskies.
But then you also graduated from University of Minnesota Law School, which is one of the finest law schools in this nation.
Well, at the time when I went there, and I believe it still is, it's a top 20 law school. Graduated summa cum laude. I mean, whatever, no big deal.
Do they let inferior students in there? Or?
Based on my time there, one, the fact that I was there, and two, some of the friends that I had, and they know I'm right. Yes, they do.
Seth is a father of 5.
I am.
A lawyer, which is how I met you.
Yeah.
A preacher, a teacher, and also
a fan of Jack Reacher. Sorry, I'm just trying to add some alliteration to it there.
An analyst and scribe regarding the world-famous Kansas City Chiefs.
That is a thing that I do. Go Chiefs.
Seth, did you play football at any point in your school days?
I didn't, no. I really didn't even I always liked the Chiefs, but I didn't get really, really into football until like junior and senior year. I started to really enjoy it a lot more. And that kind of coincided to the Chiefs being really good with the Priest Holmes, Trent Green, Tony Gonzalez era. Best offensive line of all time, but whatever. And so I didn't really learn a ton about football until later on when I started getting interested in it again.
What were your first memories of being interested in football?
My very first memory would have been when I was living down in the Kansas City area with my family. My dad went and attended the Nazarene Theological Seminary in Kansas City. He was already a pastor in North Dakota. He was part of a church that was really like flourishing, but he felt really convicted about his lack of formal education in theology, and so he uprooted us from Beulah, North Dakota, and went down to Kansas City area. And so he would go to seminary during the week. We lived in a town about an hour and 15 minutes north of Kansas City called Marable, Missouri. And he would, during the week, he would attend seminary and also worked as a janitor full time. So during the day he went to seminary, during nights he janitorized. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a word. And so then he was only back on weekends where he helped pastor a really teeny tiny country church. And so he was only home usually Saturdays and Sundays. And so we would watch football together. And that was in a time, he's a big Vikings fan. And that was in a time where you couldn't just watch whoever you wanted. DirecTV wasn't a thing. And so the Chiefs were the team that was on locally. He really liked Joe Montana. He liked, he had a lot of respect for Marty Schottenheimer and that. So he kind of adopted them, and that's when we would watch games together. Yeah. And so, really, it's kind of funny. I've written about this actually because I have people ask me all the time why I'm in Minnesota writing about the Chiefs, and it's segments that I've done and talked to people about. Really, what I liked football, but I wanted to spend time with my dad. And so you kind of, that's one of the beautiful things about sports is you have those things like that. Yeah. So my very first football memory of becoming just hooked on the Chiefs is Joe Montana marching the Chiefs down the field with 1:32 left on the clock to beat John Elway at Mile High Stadium. He hit Willie Davis on the right side of the end zone. My entire family freaked out, and that I've just been a Chiefs fan ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was actually Joe Montana because I don't associate Joe Montana with the Chiefs,
right?
And I mean, I saw him actually one year when the Chiefs used to train in River Falls, Wisconsin. And I grew up in Stillwater, and I remember one year we did go over there to because it's only about like maybe 45 minutes away. Nice. And just because we wanted to see Joe Montana. I mean, the man was a living legend.
Yes.
Still is. But now it's interesting. I guess this Super Bowl matchup that we'll get to in a little bit is sort of like both of his teams involved, but I think he associates himself more with the Niners, of course, because he won all his championships there. But do you pity us poor Viking fans, including your dad, and I think you've got some other in-laws or siblings?
I do.
Yeah.
Well, so both of my
what
siblings...
advice can you give us? I mean...
both of my siblings are Chiefs fans, Sarah and Hope. They kind of adopted the Chiefs as well. Sarah tried to have like split loyalties, Chiefs Vikings, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, you can't serve two masters.
Yeah, you cannot. You cannot. You will love one, and etc. And I like the Vikings. If I'm not cheering for the Chiefs, I'm cheering for the Vikings.
Yeah,
but you can't.
But they married Vikings fans, didn't they?
They did. Yeah.
Okay.
My brothers-in-law, Jason and Lauren, are both big-time Viking fans.
Yeah. And your dad, I think, still.
My dad is still a big. Yeah, he cried when the Minneapolis Miracle happened.
Yeah.
And so I think the best advice I
cried the next week.
I mean, here's if I were to give Vikings fans advice, it can happen to you. It doesn't feel like it can. The Chiefs didn't win a playoff game for 25 years, and they hadn't even been back to the Super Bowl in 50 years when they finally won. And I would just say it really is all that much sweeter when it actually happens, given the valleys. But you need the quarterback. And what I would just tell Vikings fans that are watching this, really like him, respect him. I think he's a great man. Kirk Cousins isn't the guy.
Wow.
You can't compete. Just ask yourself, how do you feel about a one-off Kirk Cousins against Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert or any of these mutants?
Well, you name those guys, and really I think the only quarterback that I would really fear out of those, if everybody's healthy and the line is bolstered, would be Mahomes. I think the rest of them are beatable, and they have been beat
by Mahomes.
I think if you were to look at Cousins' record against all those guys, I bet you he's beat them all.
Yeah, not when it counts.
Not when it counts.
And that's the problem in the in the playoffs. Matchups become so team specific.
Yeah.
And it's much more game planned and tailored to a specific guy.
Because you have so much time to prep.
You have more time to prep, and you're not leaving anything on the table anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where Cousins he's a really good quarterback. But you need a lot of things to go right around him. You need a lot of things to go right around anyone. It's not like Mahomes has won the Super Bowl every year.
No, but he's sort of like, you talk about like Brady or Mahomes as being like the exception to the quarterback who you can spend a lot of money on and still have a decent team because he can actually make up for the fact that you don't have the money to spend on free agents.
Right, and that's a really good point. I mean, when I say like it could happen to you, Patrick Mahomes hasn't really happened to the league before.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest thing you might have is maybe when Kurt Warner kind of came out of nowhere, but that was an entirely different story because, he was like undrafted and no one saw it coming. Mahomes was picked 10th. It's not like this ultimate underdog story. Fell to 10th, even though he acts like it was.
There's another underdog quarterback that has a story like that. But we'll get to that later too. But yeah.
and so it's not necessarily a template. Like, well, just find Patrick Mahomes. I don't know why none of these idiots do
course.
that.
Yeah, anybody could have taken him. What was he drafted? 13th overall?
10th
overall.
And the Chiefs traded up. They traded right up. They traded with the Bills actually, and now he's eliminated from the playoffs 3 of the last 4 years. Oh, it's just delicious. Anyway, I do think that would be the thing with Vikings fans though is really you just stay the course and you get the guy. And Kirk Cousins is this close to being the guy. I think they should draft a quarterback this year. Yeah. They've got you need the right coach too, and I think they've got the right coach.
Okay. All right. So you think KOC is has the material up in the gray matter or whatever it takes to guide the Vikings to victory.
I do. He does kind of similar to what Andy Reid does with the Chiefs. The offense is his baby and like the general team direction. Yeah. And then he finds a defensive coordinator, which he has, that he can trust completely. And their DC is a great one. Really, really good at what he does. And then he just hands the defense over. Yeah. And he says, I'm the boss. I call the shots in terms of what our direction is as a team, but the defense is yours. I'm going to deal with the offense. I really like how KOC utilized Justin Jefferson and integrated Jordan Addison. I mean, they really, and Hawkinson too. He really did a great job maximizing all their strengths. And even when Jefferson went down, finding ways to adjust the offense to create opportunities for Addison. I think he's a really good coach.
Have you looked at all at any of these quarterbacks that are supposed to be coming out this year? I mean, of course, the class is supposed to be historically good, headlined by Caleb Williams, but then you got Drake May from North Carolina, Jaden Daniels from LSU, kind of rounding out that top three. But then there's some others out there who played in big games. Michigan, J.J. McCarthy, of course, national championship. There's the Penix, who seems like he's been around forever, but he played in the national championship game. Bo Nix from Oregon. Even a guy like Spencer Rattler, who was playing, I think got benched for Caleb Williams over at Oklahoma, went over to South Carolina and had a decent career in the SEC and has potential there for maybe a late round steal. But any of those guys kind of stand out for you as potentially, I mean, I know it's impossible to tell at this point, but I mean, have you looked? Well, first of all, I'll say, have you looked at any of them?
I haven't looked at their film closely. The only one that I've looked at a little bit is Caleb Williams, and that was more curiosity because I heard all the Mahomes comparisons. Yeah. And every year someone's been compared to Mahomes, and that's what happens, right? When, it's like this guy, like
he's
the
next,
he's the next this and that, and it always is like that. And I've in terms of Williams, ever since 2018 when Mahomes kind of burst onto the scene or whatever, I've never felt like any of those comparisons were fair because with Mahomes, it's not just about the ability to create the spectacular. It's also about snap-by-snap consistency. I remember you and I were chatting about it once, and you were just like, you watched like a whole game. It's like, I don't think he made one mistake. Yeah. And that's part of why they're back in the Super Bowl this year, is he hasn't really tried to go beyond himself and create too much. And so that there's a push and a pull there that's hard to do. And also almost no one can do the stuff that he does. Caleb Williams is the closest thing I've seen to it. I don't know about the consistency. He hasn't been as consistent, but like the actual freakish arm angles and the being able to pull plays out of nowhere, he's at that level. So that's really intriguing to me.
Have you seen him interviewed at all?
I haven't.
Okay. Because I know that they talk about makeup and everything else like that when it comes to quarterback position and leadership ability and all that. Because a lot of times, you can see guys coming out of college or they have these, freakish physical characteristics and run fast, throw hard, all that kind of stuff. Sure. And, they're playing in a big time league like the SEC or even the Pac-10 or the Pac-12 or whatever it's called.
Whatever.
It's basically the Big Ten now because I think USC is joining the Big Ten next year. But
I think it's all the Big Ten at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's all just the Big Ten and the SEC, and that's it. But you don't really see what they're going to be like, in terms of can they handle the pressure, and will they be the leader of men that you really are looking for in that position as well.
Absolutely. And people kind of roll their eyes at that sort of thing because we live in an era where we, in the era of the way football analysis is right now, it's all about the things that we can see and analyze and make numerical and create a statistic for it. And that's very important, certainly. That's why we know way more about football now than we did 20 years ago, because of analytics and some of the way of gathering that information and actually utilizing it. That's why we know now, like, oh, hey, it is more efficient to pass the ball than to run for 3 yards a carry. Who knew?
Or going for it on fourth down.
Yeah, going for it on fourth down. And so, but because of that, we tend to underestimate some of the things that we can't see. Yeah. And
the intangibles.
Yes, those intangibles. And, like, is this guy someone who is going to actually outwork everyone else in the building? Quarterback is a really unique position in that, unlike most positions and all but the most unique players that I've talked to, they generally, when I talk to an offensive lineman, he knows his assignment on a play. he generally isn't going to learn everyone else's assignment, and he's not going to learn the routes. He's not going to learn the drop. He's got to learn what he's going to do. And there's so much information involved in football, you almost have to do that because everyone has a limit to the amount of information they can maintain and process in, a split second while 300-pound men are trying to eat you, So the thing with quarterbacks, they have to learn everyone's job. And so it's really not just a matter of physical talent. It's also a matter of an insane amount of information and being able to process that information quickly. And the field you and I are in, we understand the difference between someone who is able to know and understand a lot of information versus someone who is able to utilize that information on the fly in a split second. And that's the difference between an attorney who's really gifted in motion practice. Because I'm sure you've known attorneys that write great briefs, like unbelievable briefs, but you put them in a contested omnibus hearing and things go a little bit outside the flow of what they're expecting, which always happens.
They can't punch their way out of a wet paper bag with scissors in their hands.
Exactly. They just, and you see it happen, like, or in front of a jury, or you got people that just, they get in front of a jury and they just get nervous. They don't quite know how to present. And so really it is that people don't think of that mental stuff as talent, but the ability to process information quickly and act on it, that is a talent and a skill.
What use is it of having all that information if you're not able to effectively utilize it?
Right, and that's why there's some attorneys that are mostly trial attorneys.
Yeah.
And there's some, and most attorneys, once they've been doing it long enough, they kind of figure out what they're best at, and they play to those strengths.
It's their style.
Yeah, there are some attorneys that they barely have to do motion practice because they'll just look the other guy in the eye and say, I'll try anything, so give me a good offer. and there are a few of them.
That is an effective strategy.
I'm thinking of a few at the top of my head right now in the area where I'm just like, man, you will try anything. You're really good at it. So, okay. We'll take off the top count, maybe knock it down some of the jail time. So that's, until someone's in the building, it's hard to know because, of course, former coaches are going to speak glowingly about a guy. So it really is hard to know what that makeup is, and also how are they going to handle it when things go poorly, because they always go poorly. Like even Mahomes, probably the most successful start to a career in NFL history, probably. But it's not like, he had his kneecap completely dislocated and like to the side of his leg the year they won the Super Bowl. He's had his receivers.
Which he did.
Yeah, they won. That was awesome.
For those of you who don't know.
Yes, and yeah, they went and won the Super Bowl. Like, how is he going to handle the first time you lose a couple games in a row?
Yeah.
How's he going to
adversity?
Yeah. How are you going to handle those moments? Are you someone who's going to start pointing a finger? Are you someone who is going to just take the blame?
Are you gonna hide?
Yeah, are you gonna hide, or are you gonna be the one who says, "Well, no, I need to be better"? Fun story. After the Chiefs lost to the Eagles earlier this year, and on one of the late in the fourth quarter, one of his receivers dropped a pass down the field that would have been a go-ahead score.
Yep.
And it was a beautiful downfield
Isn't that
throw.
like Kadarius Toney or
that
something?
Well, yeah, I can see why you'd believe that because he's done that a lot this season too. But this was Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who's actually been a hero in the playoffs.
He's a Packer guy.
Yeah, Packer previously.
Yeah.
And it was a drop. Jazz actually has a picture of me face down on the floor. Jazz, my wife, for your listeners and viewers.
Right.
She has a picture of me face down on the floor because when he threw it and I saw he was open, I went ah! Yeah. And then he dropped it and I hit my knees after the game, and it was a beautiful throw.
She should have submitted that to Life magazine.
I actually used it in an article I wrote called 5 Stages of Being a Chiefs Fan in 2023 because I know a lot of people feel really bad for Chiefs fans right now, trying to figure out how we're making it through these dark times of almost not making the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
It was hard,
I
but
know.
we made it through. So after the game, Mahomes was, of course, at the podium being asked about that last play, and what he said is, I could have put that a little bit shorter, made that a little bit easier for him to grab. And the whole world went like, "You sure about that?
Yeah.
You sure about that?"
Well, actually,
and that's what a leader does.
See, you're right. And that's one of the things that there's a list of qualities that leaders possess. Because one of the goals of leadership is to improve the attitude and behavior of the other people. And one of the things that they'll say to do is to point to your own faults first before you go on to, criticize other people or speak about other people's faults, is to start off with yourself and do that. And I think that's, the sign of somebody who really who gets it in terms of how to deal with it. Because, people like, that the receiver is going to be seeing how he reacts, whether it's, if it's in the media or even just in the locker room or wherever. he's going to be, after the game, he's probably thinking to himself, like, oh boy, is this guy, is he going to be mad at me? Like,
is he going to throw me under the bus?
Throw me under the
Be
bus?
like, yeah, I can't throw the ball and catch the ball.
We got to get some new players, or,
Right.
whatever. But I think it's, if you take the position that I could have done better, it inspires the other person to do better the next time without you actually having to confront them by criticizing, condemning, or complaining about their performance.
Right, and that's a huge difference between leaders and pushers. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I struggle with. I'm more of a pusher. I at our church, I told our pastor that, hey, I'm a terrific number 2. You you don't want me to be someone who's setting the vision.
I would agree with that. No,
and you don't. Well, no, you'd be correct though. I am not someone who I'm not great with leadership in the way that I ought to be, because for me, too often my line is some version of "suck it up, Buttercup." Like
right.
And that's the voice I have in my head is okay. Well, why didn't I do that correctly? Well, it's because I'm a failure and stupid and really wasn't disciplined enough in this moment. And so then what I do is I transpose that to someone else and I say, well, no, the reason you failed is because you're a failure. But if you stop failing, you won't be a failure anymore. And that's not leadership.
No.
And that's where you need someone who's willing to genuinely lead and not push. And that's a tough thing to do.
And to praise improvements.
Yeah.
And then big improvements especially, but then to praise every improvement.
Right.
To say that, hey, the next time you get out of the huddle, you can complete a pass. Hey, there you go. That's how I want to see it.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
So that's a way of building somebody's confidence up.
It is.
And it's all about, it's really, a lot of it is about just improving the attitude of the person.
Yeah.
Because if a person has a terrible attitude, we've seen that in the NFL. But
or in any field,
really. Yep. But it's just that they're not going to perform anywhere near their capability if they're going into it with just an awful attitude.
Right.
I can remember when I was a kid, go shovel the sidewalk or something. I'd be like, I don't want to do that.
I can't believe you would be like that.
Do that, and then it takes me, so long because I just. Take a little shovel,
a gram of snow at a time.
I shouldn't have to do this. Whereas if I went into it being like, yeah, this is a great opportunity for me to help around the house. I'm going to take care of this, get it done right. You're going to do it faster. You're going to do it better.
Yep.
And you're going to smile on your face.
With a big old smile. Or even just a willing heart.
Yeah.
And that's that line from Remember the Titans, attitude reflects leadership. And that's where, now there are some people who don't want to be led, and that's, there's difficult decisions to be made sometimes. But most people, more or less, are looking for leadership. They are looking for guidance. They're looking for a direction to go. At least sincere-hearted people.
Yeah.
I think you can kind of take all those generalities out the door when you're talking with people that aren't good-faithed. But most good-faith people, they are going to give a better effort for someone that they believe will support them and back them.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I love about football, just like, we might circle back to football about everything. But I do think that football and a lot of team sports reflect life in that way, in that you genuinely get a chance to understand that, it doesn't matter how good you are at your job if you're a schmuck. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a schmuck, no one's going to like you. And if they don't like you, they're not going to be willing to follow you, no matter how good you are.
Yeah, right. Absolutely true. And
that's something that people have learned about Tom Brady once he got away from the confines of New England where you're not allowed to talk ever. I hate that I'm going to say it. He seems like a pretty likable guy. Right. He doesn't take himself too seriously.
Yeah.
Like he was doing a walking tour after this last AFC championship, and they posted like a TikTok where he's walking. They're like on some farm somewhere. He's like, "Oh, look, it's the Patrick Mahomes exhibit." And this is Tom Brady saying this, and someone panned over, and it's a kennel with goats in it. Because, GOAT, greatest of all time. And people are already asking, well, is Mahomes greater than Brady? And his fans freak out. And Brady doesn't take himself that seriously. And that kind
of... He doesn't have to prove anything.
Right. You can tell. You can also tell, he's like a 45, 46-year-old man that's like, I don't have anything to prove. But that kind of attitude, that kind of willingness to kind of take what happened and accept it and care about someone and be like, hey, you know what? I could have done this better. We can talk about you at some point, but you know what? I could have helped you more here. People will follow that, and that will eventually come around.
Yeah, and I think being, like you said, being likable is very important. I was just at the high school the other day doing kind of like a career day presentation to them.
Oh, sure.
And I was telling them, I was giving him the example of, okay, let's say you're at a car dealership, you're the salesman and you're the buyer, right? As a salesman, what's the first job that you have to do when you come into the contact with the buyer?
Right.
A lot of them would say, well, I got to tell them what cars I have, and I got to give them, all my encyclopedic knowledge of the features of the vehicle. Then we'll start talking about price and everything like that. And I said, yeah, well, those are all really important things. But the number one thing you got to do when it comes to that customer is you have to get them to like you.
Yes.
Because if they don't like you, they're not going to buy the car from you, whether you know everything there is to know about it, whether you have the best price or not. They're going to buy the same vehicle at a higher price, or an inferior vehicle at a higher price from somebody who they like and trust.
There's been so much research that's been put into voir dire, jury selection. And, the line is, and you've said this to me before, generally speaking, what is it? Jury trials are won at voir dire or by overwhelming evidence.
Right.
And sometimes, as a prosecutor, you don't always have overwhelming evidence. Mm-hmm. You hopefully have enough. You have enough you believe beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yep.
But what people generally expect these days is like, well, is it on camera in HD?
Yeah.
Did they find a bunch of DNA at the scene? I've watched CSI. Well, that's not how it works almost ever. No. Especially, I tend to prosecute felony domestics and that kind of thing. We never have as much evidence as people think we should have.
Right.
Because we don't live in a Big Brother society. We're on our way.
Yeah.
But we're not quite there yet.
Right.
Right. And so, really, the voir dire, like being able to connect with people on a jury, that matters. And the answer that people will often come back with is say, well, it shouldn't matter. Sure, that's true. It shouldn't matter how much someone likes you about a car. It should matter only the type of car, the price, and all that. It should only matter.
That's not human nature.
That's not human nature. And so we could sit here and live in fairyland and say, well, it should not be this way, so I will behave as though it is not. But that's not how that works.
No.
Being
likable. You'd be a fool to proceed with that understanding.
Absolutely. You can't behave as though the world is what you wish it were. And like I kind of wish it was actually like just a bunch of X's and O's sometimes, where it was like, here's the algorithm, this is what I'm gonna do, and then it's a list of rules. That's how I approach marriage way too often. I ask my wife, okay, well, what would you like me to do in this situation? And then she's learned over the course of 16 years that she can't really give me a straight answer there, because then that is exactly what I will do in that situation or in any situation that resembles it. But what she wants is for me to love her and be kind. And that doesn't necessarily have like an algorithm to it. Yeah. And it might not look the same in every situation.
Right.
It's like, well, I thought you said you wanted me to hold you accountable, but not like that, and that really is how it works, is you can't take the humanity out of human processes.
Right.
I'm going to write that down. That was just...
Yeah. Well, it's being recorded now, so you don't
Oh, thank God, because I can't remember things.
All right. I wanted to ask you this question. So if, let's say, somebody came to visit us from the country of France.
Okay.
Right. It doesn't have to be France. It could be another country or
Sure.
something like that. And I said, I'd like to he was curious about the game of American football. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I know somebody who knows quite a bit about it. His name's Seth Keysor, a friend of mine. How would you define football to this person in a minimum amount of sentences, say 2 or 3 sentences?
I would say it's the closest thing we have to the idea of warfare in a sport, with the idea being capturing territory.
Yep.
I broke the thing.
Nope.
With the idea being to capture territory or to prevent the enemy from capturing territory.
Yeah.
Because that's really all you're doing. You're defending every yard in football.
Yeah.
And I would
Very
say...
philosophical definition, because you didn't say, well, the object of the game is to outscore more points than your opponent. And
Oh, absolutely. and it is. But the way in which you do it is by taking territory until you get to the end zone. So I think I would start with that. Mm-hmm. And then I would also say it's with a bunch of intricately connected rules.
Yeah.
And that's where... And then, that sounds kind of interesting. And then maybe you can get, okay, well, there's a ball, and it's not round, because, and that's one of my favorite things, my good friend Nate Taylor, who does the Only Word Games podcast with me, he always talks about it's a silly sport where the ball isn't even round.
Yeah.
So when that thing hits the ground, you have no idea where it might go.
Right.
It can bounce anywhere. And so it's beautifully intricate chaos.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like to tell people.
And so if you were to say, well, why would I bother getting into that or following it? Like, what's in it for me as a potential fan of football?
I think football has something for everyone, because if you are just like a dude who likes watching dudes hit other dudes, there's a lot of that. If you like watching incredible athletic achievement and grace and ability, it has that.
Right.
But now if you're someone who's really into strategy, it has more of that. It's like, it's also a way you could describe it, although chess doesn't work quite the same way, right? Because when you get to the other side, you don't win. But when you think about it, you got like your offensive and defensive lines moving forward there with your pawns and everything like that. It's like the strategy side of it is limitless.
Yeah.
There's virtually no limitation to the amount of strategy that you can have in football, because you have play stoppages and different formation designs. And for every lever you pull, I compare football to if you entered like a giant stadium with millions of levers in it. And every decision you make, you pull one lever, and it's going to affect hundreds of other levers throughout the room, some of which you intended, many of which you did not. And then based on how those levers are affected, the other team does something. It's kind of like the idea like, okay, well, this team plays a lot of too high safeties, so we're going to want to run mills against them a bunch of times to where we take out one of those safeties and then send another guy across the middle of the field. But see, they know that you think that. So then what they're going to do is they're probably going to call more middle field closed, but you know that they know that you know that. And so so the people that are into strategy, it's got that too. So there's drama with the celebrations. There's something for everyone with football, and that's what Swifties are finding out right now.
Really good way to put it, and I think that it's unlike it's unlike any other sport, and we'll get to the Swifties, but they Jazz
would be very mad at me if we didn't.
I had a question about something that you said there about the comparison to chess, because we know that chess has basically been solved by artificial intelligence. They've also now I think have defeated the top player of the game, ancient Chinese game Go,
shout out to Google. I'm sure this is all going to end well.
Yeah.
These people have never seen a movie.
Right.
Honestly, Arnold was warning us in the 80s. Yeah. But I'm sure machinery will continue to be benevolent.
At what point do you think, or would it even be possible for the game of football to be solved, in the sense that the both sides would at least know the basic formations and offenses and defenses that they must run in order to be successful?
The beauty of it is because it's so responsive, and because it's individual play based. And so every time when you move in chess, it's one person moving at one time. However, in football, it's 11 people moving at one time, with 11 people moving at one time, and it's people,
right? And it's real time as opposed to turn based.
And and the real time aspect of it, I think, is what does it, because otherwise it would just be a matter of having enough memory to do the millions of possible combinations. Yeah. The problem is you can't really account for the human element, to where each team has to do things differently. So, for example, let's say AI determines that a 43 defense with 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers is the ideal perfect defense, as opposed to a 34 with 3 linemen and 4 linebackers.
As a base defense.
Yeah, as a base defense. But the problem is you happen to coach a team that has 4 terrific linebackers, but none of them are really big enough to play DN the way you quite want them to. And you've got 3 certain types of defensive linemen that can play certain gaps, but they can't. You have to account for that, because if you try to force, they talk about this all the time, forcing a square peg into a round hole. Bad coaches take what's their thing and what works for them, and then they try to force that onto their players. Good coaches, they've got their stuff that they do, but they're willing to adapt. That's why Andy Reid has been a dominant offensive mind for 25 years, because he's changed his offense over and over, and you have to change it. And that's why, the best thing to do on 4th and 3 at the opponent's 34-yard line with 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter might be different from one day to the next, because you don't know what the wind is. You don't know who you have healthy. You don't know how you've played against that. You don't know if their Sam linebacker has been crashing onto your right tackle all game, as opposed to playing the way they normally would. So you can't account for that human element and the surprise factor, and the ball just not being around. It just introduces chaos to it. So people that like chaos can love football too. I love football so much.
I can tell. what is your, okay, well, first of all, kind of give us a little bit of your history in terms of starting being an analyst and a writer, and then, what you're presently working on in terms of your Substack.
Sure. So, so in 2007, Jazz and I got married, and I started to follow the Chiefs a little bit more closely. I moved to Minnesota.
You got married, then you started watching more football? Isn't
Yeah.
that usually a formula for
Yeah, I know. It's a
disaster?
bizarre thing. So what ended up happening was I started getting, I had to cut some other hobbies out of my life.
Okay.
I quit drinking, I quit carrying on and that kind of stuff because
Right.
Jazz was very clear she had no interest in me being a carousing fool.
Uh-huh.
And so I ceased being a carousing
Few
fool.
women do have interest in that.
Few women have interest in that, and I saw how far I was out kicking my coverage, and I said, whatever you want, and it worked really well. So I started following the Chiefs a little more closely, and there really weren't any Chiefs fans that I knew, other than my sisters, but they didn't live in the same town, so there was never anyone to talk to. So you start like going online. You got to remember, this is 2007, where like messaging boards and stuff were kind of the thing. And you start to comment there, and I found a blog on SB Nation called Arrowhead Pride, where they allowed readers to like post their own articles, but they were blogs. And so I did a few, and for one reason or another, other people on the site started commenting on mine more than others, and liking them and recommending them and stuff. And eventually, when you fast forward to 2011, when I went to law school, I had taken on kind of a free, it's called a contributor role. Most people that start off in sports media, depending on if they're not a legacy, you usually start working for free because those jobs are in incredibly high demand. There's so many people who are willing to do it for free just because it's so cool. Hey, I posted this thing, and now it's the lead story on this big site that hundreds of thousands or millions of people read. That's a rush for people. They love that. And because there's so many people willing to do it for free, you got to be willing to do it for free. Once I started going to law school, I'd let my editor know, hey, my time's a little precious. I need to make a little money doing this. And so my first paycheck from SB Nation was $50 a month for probably a year. And then I think they upped it to $100. And then, so
That's like 1.8 packets of ramen every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's everything helps. And so I worked for SB Nation for a number of years, and I started having the opportunity to do some radio spots on 810. For one reason or another, my particular role grew beyond things that had gone there previously, and the site itself in SB Nation actually really exploded. And so I got lucky, is the short thing. I've been blessed. And so that started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then The Athletic came onto the scene in approximately 2017, I want to say, give or take. And they were snapping up sports writers from everywhere. And I happen to know, and I don't think I can say his name, but I happen to know for a fact that someone that they were trying to steal from a local newspaper who was a terrific writer. They kept trying to take him, and he's like, who would be great for what you're trying to do would be Seth Keysor. And so they talked to a few other kind of local writers, and for one reason or another, they pointed them towards me. And so then The Athletic came calling and offered me a part-time job with them.
Yeah.
And that was just this huge blessing. So I worked for them for a number of years. And then 3 years ago, coming up on 4 years ago, actually, during COVID and everything that was going on, The Athletic, like a lot of sports coverage companies, were kind of shrinking their roles a little bit because they didn't even know if there would be an NFL season.
Right.
They had no idea what might happen. And so they cut down my role significantly, and Jazz and I had just bought our first house. I had just accepted a job at the county attorney's office here in town, which coming up on 4 years there.
Yeah.
And so I need to do something. Well, Substack, which is what I do primarily now, was just starting to get a little more into the scene. And it's basically an email list with a functioning website that has a really good, I don't even know what it's really called. The methodology that you use to have, to the WordPress type thing.
Yeah.
And it works really well. You can put in videos and stuff. And I just decided to try to start my own, just to see, maybe I told Jazz, maybe this can supplement our income to kind of match what The Athletic used to pay me, because they had to cut down my number of articles and then commensurate with that, my pay.
Yeah.
And it just, from the very first like 2 days that I started it, like my hope was like, okay, maybe one day, many years from now, 1,000 paid subscribers, that would be incredible. Like the first day or two, like 500-600 paid subscribers signed up, and then it just kind of snowballed to an extent, and it's always continued to grow.
Yeah.
And so I've just primarily been doing my own thing. I stopped working for The Athletic full-time. Well, not full-time, but stopped working for them as a writer this last football season. And then our podcast, Times Ours, morphed into Only Weird Games and moved to the Kansas City Sports Network, which is who I now work for in that capacity. Shout out to BJ, sent me this. He's my boss. Just sent me this wonderful sweatshirt.
And what's the name of your Substack, or how would people find it?
The Chief of the North newsletter. If people want to read about the Chiefs or go a little bit beyond the box score in football, I try to analyze what's going on that maybe people miss when they watch the game. Yeah. I really will tell people that football is a beautiful sport, and so many people who watch it and love it, but maybe didn't play beyond like a high school level, because the game changes so much from NFL to high school. So in some ways, I'm actually aided in only having experience knowing about pro stuff. And I've had a lot of former players and current players and analysts who have been willing to explain a lot of stuff to me. And I don't have this other stuff that doesn't really apply, that messes with me at all. So if people wanted to read that, I think the more I learn about football, the more I love it. I think it would be the same for almost anyone.
One of the things, I remember when you and I were working out in the courthouse at the neighboring county here, we had a conversation once around that time where I think you told me that the analysis of football that you do is really, I mean, not that it's not an end in and of itself, but that the idea that it's to get people to truly sort of ask questions or to understand their basic assumptions. Like, and I think we talked about the like certain statistics like sacks or something like that.
Sure.
Right? And to say that, you know, the common, or I shouldn't say the common, but, you know, maybe the more general understanding is that a guy has 12 sacks, he's better than the guy that has 4 sacks or something like
absolutely.
that, right? And they're just going to believe that, and or they're going to have certain basic things like, you know, you're always going to go for the field goal on 4th and 1, or you always play for the tie, or you know, all those things that that the thought process behind it hasn't really been explained to them. It's just sort of been taken as you know, the truth about football. And one of the things that really is sort of unique about your approach is that you try to educate people so that they question those basic assumptions.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that in that sense, that's something that I try to talk to people about, whether it comes to their view of football, whether it comes to their view of life in this world. Like, I'm really big into apologetics in terms of my Christian faith. And so often what I find is people don't even know the assumptions that they're making. And I include myself in that, right? Like, I thought back in 2010 that Matt Castle was a good quarterback because he threw, I think, 27 touchdowns with 7 interceptions. I made some assumptions that the box score would tell me what was really going on, but the box score doesn't really tell you the how. It tells you what, but not necessarily. And an easy example of this, a quarterback throws a 3-yard dump off that a running back takes on a screen for 90 yards to the house.
Yeah.
That's
quarterback is credited with 90 yards.
Yep. Whereas on the flip side, let's say a quarterback drops back and makes an incredible 15-yard out throw to the opposite hash that the receiver drops, it gets tipped up in the air, and the defender picks it off. The box score will tell you that the quarterback made a bad play.
Interception.
And what people will assume is, well, that all evens out with time, but that's not true, because football is a small sample size sport. You're talking maybe 50 plays in a game.
Right.
And it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of snaps for that sort of thing to even out. And because people are playing different opponents, it doesn't even out necessarily. You're not going to have the same results playing, you know, a really bad, like the Las Vegas Raiders defense as you will against the Kansas City Chiefs defense, because they're two different levels. Stupid Raiders. Anyway, so it's the same thing for me, and I view it like that. I really, if I could encourage people to do anything, and this is part of why I write about football, is to encourage this kind of thinking in general, is to challenge, why do you believe the thing that you believe?
Right.
And it's like the book that you and I have both read, talking about, defending and discussing your Christian beliefs.
You're talking about the tactics book.
Yep. The idea is, well, what do you mean by that? That is a powerful question. Like, what do you mean by that? Well, he's better. Well, what do you mean by that?
Right.
Well, he's better at getting to the quarterback. Okay, well, what are you basing that information on? Because so much of what we base what we believe on isn't solid. And a belief is only as good as its foundation. You might be right, but it would be accidental. Mm-hmm. And I think so many people would be genuinely healthier and happier if they really understood what they believe, why they believe it, and where they're coming from.
Right. Like there's a foundation.
Yes.
And by doing your type of analysis, you're kind of trying to strengthen the foundations for or giving them the tools that they need to make to have a better opinion, so to speak.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
And that's what I always tell people when they tell me that they've learned something from the game or they love the game more than they used to. Mm-hmm. That to me is like, oh, cool. Yeah. That's the goal. I want people just to learn to think a little bit differently. I personally believe that like critical thinking courses should be taught in every high school. Yeah. Because just understanding that you have premise, logical conclusion. Mm-hmm. That can be a bit of a lost art.
And you are teaching the apologetics now. And I was going to bring that up because I think that there is some sort of an overlap there between your approach to analyzing a football game and perhaps your approach to Christian apologetics as well.
There is. And the big thing is making people understand, if you're talking to someone that has differences of opinions, those are going to happen. Yeah. With very smart people. And then the question becomes, well, what do we ultimately disagree about? And really asking the right question is such an important thing in football and in life. Like, are you asking the right question? Is what are you starting way at the finish line when you should have really come back here? So many questions that people have about faith, or it's like a hyper specific question to like, well, how could you support? And then like they put some piece of legislation out there or something like that, right? Something to simplify things. It's like, well, no, you're way down here. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the beginning. What is more likely, that something has always been or something came from nothing? Because it has to be one or the other. Mm-hmm. There's and that's not a false choice, logical fallacy. That's literally it. Right. Either something came from nothing or something has always been. What's easier to believe? And reasonable people can disagree on that. I've had people way smarter than me that are avowed atheists that are like, well, it's easier for me to believe something came from nothing. And I said, okay, fair enough. Mm-hmm. That's harder for me to believe. Right. It's easier for me to believe in something eternal. Well, if we decide something eternal, well, then what does that lead to? And then like if you start at the beginning rather than the middle or the end, then you can actually have conversations about things as opposed to
taking a specific instance and then just trying to sort of hammer away at that.
Right.
Like, let's just like step back a little bit and look at the forest a little bit instead of just the trees.
Yeah. Let's not butcher inductive reasoning. Like let's, or let's not, butcher deductive reasoning. I'm sorry. Where you just like, well, let's just take this one thing and then go from there. So that colors a lot of what I do, honestly. That's how I try to teach. Part of it's because I'm kind of a slave to how I think. We're all kind of a slave to our own experiences. Mm-hmm. That's how I think.
Absolutely.
And so I try to and
we see things in light of our own experiences.
We do. And for me, the number of times that I've been wrong, which are many, were in large part because I was starting way over here. Mm-hmm. Not at the very beginning. Like I think so many husbands could benefit from really asking themselves, like, okay, why am I upset right now? Is it wow, she did? Well, no. Let's start at the beginning. What's your role here? Yeah. And like if you start at the beginning, you might not get to a place you want to get to, but you might get to a place that contains a lot more truth.
And it's an approach I admire too, because I think I'm also a big fan of getting, starting with the fundamentals and kind of, building up from that in just about everything. So I want to shift the gears again more directly toward football and talk about officiating in the NFL. Because I think actually officiating is a topic that kind of is an overlap between two of the things that you're expert in, that being legal analysis and football. So I want to talk specifically about replay standards, and from what I understand, there sort of clear and convincing standard that gets applied to the replays. So
Sure, to overturn a play.
To overturn a play.
Yep.
Right. So if the call on the field is X, unless there is clear and convincing evidence from the film that it was in fact not X will stand.
Yep.
Even if you thought it's probably not X.
Sure.
You still have to stick to that standard. Is that an appropriate standard for the NFL to utilize in your view? Or would you rather see it be more like a 51% standard? Or would you, on the other hand, like to see it more like a beyond a reasonable doubt standard?
Sure. And so it's interesting because you kind of get to those like how appellate courts would view things. Are we reviewing this de novo? Are we reviewing this for abuse of discretion? Or what are we reviewing this for? And that's really, that kind of hits to the heart of the process of your review matters almost as much as the facts. I like the standard that they have because it allows for the human element to remain a little more. We live in an age where, there's high def everything. There's a billion different camera angles. And so are they going to get it wrong sometimes? Sure. But if you can't tell, I think clear and convincing is a good standard to have, because if you're going to overturn what happens on the field, there should be a good reason for that. It shouldn't just be, I'm pretty sure it's this other way. Because the pretty sure, that's where refs live in real time, is pretty sure. They have an incredibly hard job. So I kind of like the standard that they currently have with that.
Are there any particular plays or events in a football game that are not currently subject to review that you would like to see subject to review if you could rewrite the rule book as the dictator of the NFL?
I think, and this is hard because it's a subjective call, I think that roughing the passer is one that I would like to see come under a little more scrutiny. They've got good reasons for trying to legislate some of the violence out of the game, particularly against quarterbacks, because those are the stars. I get that. And as a guy who cheers for Patrick Mahomes, I'm very much in favor of that. But I've seen too many times where the play is called in a way where they're attempting to stay true to the spirit of the rule, but it really doesn't. And that's also a guy who cheers for a team that has Chris Jones on it. And the number of penalties I've seen him take for things that really shouldn't be. But the problem with that, it's just like pass interference. It's a subjective thing. And so that would be one I would pick to allow them to at least review it, and they'd overturn it if it were clear and convincing. The thing is, the NFL already tried that with pass interference, and what the refs did is they just upheld it every single time throughout the entire season.
Right.
And I think that's what they would do with this too.
Okay. Just sort of because the refs have an interest in protecting their little fiefdom there.
Well, also I think for them it's like if I think it's almost the somewhat of a slippery slope fallacy, but I think there's some merit to it in they're like, what's gonna happen if we overturn this one? How much does it really with something as subjective as pass interference? So I would love for them to take a closer look at that. Other than that, I just love the game as it is.
I heard somebody recently, and I can't remember where I saw this. It was somewhere on the internet, but saying that as far as spotting the ball, right? If there was some, you cover the ball in a layer of GPS material or something.
Yeah, sure.
Like
Put
that,
a
right?
microchip in the ball.
Put a microchip in the ball, and that will tell us conclusively where the play ended, and a spotlight could be shown on the field exactly where to put the ball, no argument.
I don't know if I love that. I don't know why. I think that's partly the human side of the game. And so if they did it, it wouldn't bother me that much. Because it's not like they don't already have...
It's like balls and strikes in baseball, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Are baseball fans happier now? Because I don't think they are.
Well, they have an umpire. They still have called balls and strikes.
Right.
Yeah.
But they freak out more knowing exactly whether it was right or wrong.
Yeah.
Man, that would bum me out a little bit, honestly. It's not going to really make you happier. And one thing that's worth noting, in today's era with next-gen stats and stuff, there is already some form of chip or GPS tracker in the ball. That's why they have the dots afterwards.
Oh.
It's on there already. They could do it. But I do like that they're trying to keep some of the humanity in the game.
Okay.
Because that's something that differentiates football from baseball is that baseball has really become a sport that is largely dictated almost entirely by analytics, and rightfully so, because it's a series of one-on-one battles for the most part.
Yeah, but I think just hearkening back to something you said earlier too. We were talking about intangibles at the quarterback position, and the hardcore analytics guys will say that there's no such thing as clutch hitting, and I just think that that's nonsense.
Yeah. And that's the thing. What they'll say is that, good players are more likely to be clutch players because they're more likely to be good in the big moments.
Yeah.
But the reality of the situation is you can call it anecdotal evidence, but really, when you talk about like clutch moments, how many clutch moments is a player going to be in over the course of a season? Like 5?
And then how do you explain how do you account for certain players? Like for years it was A-Rod actually, I think in baseball that would, get up to bat for the Yankees in crucial situations, and he'd have a great regular season, a great record. And then they would say, well, he's likely to get a hit here too. But actually knowing it and just seeing the look of fear, until he overcame that,
he would be better than Derek Jeter all year. And then the playoffs hit, and suddenly, that's what Jeter's well known for. A guy who was never really the best player in baseball at any point in his career, but was just nails when it counted.
Mr. October.
Being able to...
Mr. November, they
Mr. November,
Yeah.
Able to make things
because
happen.
of the 2001 season.
And so, I agree on that. Oh, one other thing I would change in football, rather than onside kicks, I wish they would give the offense the ball on their own 20-yard line and have it be like a 4th and 20. And if you convert, you get the ball back.
Oh, that's kind of a cool idea.
I think so, but I also cheer for a team with Patrick Mahomes. And if I were Andy Reid, every time, let's see if we can get up 28 zip on someone before we
Did you come up with that
chance.
yourself, or did you? Or did it...
No, I read it somewhere.
Yeah, that's I think it's a good idea.
I think the XFL did something like that.
I was going to say it must be something like that where you just get the option.
Yeah, you get the option with a very unlikely to convert, and then they get the ball where you've got it, so it's a risk too.
Right.
So, but I think it would be more interesting than onside kicks because those are recovered 0.0% of the time now.
So I want to shift from the general a little bit more to the specifics about the current Super Bowl, which is, if I'm reading the Roman numerals correctly, I have it written down as LVIII, which I think tells me that it's 58.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the last Super Bowl the Chiefs won was 57, so this would be 58.
This would be 58. And again, on officiating, so it is going to be Vinovich's crew.
Yes, Vinovich. He did 54.
And Vinovich is a 63-year-old man, and is the head of his crew. Mm-hmm. He has been the referee for Super Bowls. This is the first referee, or the first job he had as a referee was in 2013, which is Super Bowl 47. Which was a matchup between the Ravens and the Niners, in which the Ravens won the game. There were significant penalties and non-penalties in that game that played a role in the outcome. He was also on the crew of the Super Bowl 49, which was the famous Malcolm Butler Patriots Seahawks game. In that game, his crew called celebration penalties, excessive celebration, end zone celebration type penalties. There was one called on Doug Baldwin earlier in the game. There was also a play in that game where Julian Edelman almost, had his head knocked off in the game and wound up coming back and catching the game-winning touchdown. And then there was another excessive celebration on the Patriots after the Butler interception. He was involved his crew was involved in that I also call it an infamous game, which was an NFC championship in 2018, which everybody remembers as that no call.
Yep.
Rams against Saints.
Yeah.
Where
he just laid him out as he was.
Yes. Yep. And then his last Super Bowl he presided over was Super Bowl 54, where the Chiefs defeated the 49ers. So another matchup of this same Super Bowl, where the Chiefs beat the Niners by a score of 31-20.
It was so awesome.
And there was a key call of offensive pass interference on Kittle in that game. I don't know if you recall.
I do, yeah.
But so I'm wondering, what is your opinion of Vinovich's crew in terms of his tendencies? what would you look for when it comes to, his level of involvement in the game? Is he going to be a real hands-on official? Just sort of like, what do you think the impact of Vinovich's crew is going to be on this particular Super Bowl?
One thing I've noticed about Vinovich, and everyone's got different opinions, I think when you look at most of the calls and non-calls he's made, if you exclude the 2018 one, he generally speaking looks at things that actually impact the game and the play. So the Kittle pass interference before the end of the first half, he was one-on-one against Dan Sorensen down the right sideline. As the ball was coming there, he extended his arm fully to push Sorensen away, made the catch. Great catch, great play, offensive pass interference all day. And because it impacted the play, he called it. Generally speaking, that game didn't have a ton of whistles, and there was a lot of physical play down the field by both teams. Mm-hmm. And so if he's a guy that generally lets them play unless it impacts the game, that's what I want from refs. Like, don't impact the game unless something happens that someone gained an unfair advantage. And that's why the 2018 non-call is one that's kind of a back and forth thing. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure he gained an advantage by tackling that guy as the ball arrived, but maybe not.
Well, and a person's entitled to make a mistake too.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So I don't, honestly, I used to worry about that stuff a lot more. Now I don't. And I think when the Patriots were winning it every year, I thought about it all the time. And maybe now that the Chiefs are winning so much, maybe I don't think about it the same way. But it's more like as long as the story of the game is not the refs and the guys are generally allowed to play. And all the great players have come out and said the same thing. The game doesn't come down to one call. And that's where there's so many other plays, usually 60 on offense, 60 on defense, several on special teams. That makes up the entirety of the game. So blaming the refs on stuff is just weak sauce because, if the Saints could have won that game well before that play, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And they put themselves in a position. Travis Kelce said this after the Chiefs lost to the Bills earlier this year. When Kadarius Toney was technically offsides by, he had his foot over the line. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was at that game live, and Kelce made one of the more spectacular plays of the year, throws a lateral all the way across the field. He scores, Arrowhead freaks out, offsides on Kadarius Toney, and he did have his foot across the line. It was the technically correct call. I get why he made it. Mahomes was not happy, but I think he was mad about a bunch of other stuff too. So, but like what Kelce said afterwards, on his podcast with his brother was, we put ourselves in that position. Don't put yourself in a position to where a bad call can lose you the game.
Right.
Because that's on you. You can't control that. What you can control is every other snap.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that viewpoint on it.
How much are injuries going to play a factor in this particular Super Bowl? It seems to me like both teams are relatively healthy going into it.
Yeah,
but
both teams are pretty healthy. The Chiefs left guard, who's an all-pro, Joe Thuney, has a partly torn pec, and he might not be able to play. It's not a matter of pain. It's just a matter of whether it can function. They've got a pretty good backup, but, that's always a bummer. They're also missing their starting free safety, Brian Cook, who has been just terrific. He's a second-year player. That's a bummer because they love running 3 safety sets. Now, fortunately, Mike Edwards has come in and has done a really good job, and they've still been able to do quite a few things with 3 safety looks, but it just hasn't been what they were hoping it would be, because their 3 safety sets were actually the best in the league. But you take one guy out, and so it's tough for the Chiefs. The Niners, I think, are pretty healthy too, though. And both teams are pretty healthy, and that's what you want to see. You want to see as many guys healthy on both sides of the ball. Yeah. And so I'm excited for it. It should be fun.
You mentioned before the story of Kurt Warner and undrafted and everything like that. Well, now in this game, we've got somebody, a Mr. Irrelevant, right? He was drafted, but
Purdy good.
What's your take on Purdy? Give us a sort of a upper level assessment of him.
Well, I haven't charted his snaps specifically. So when I chart a quarterback snaps, I chart every drop back and I look at whether they made an accurate throw or an inaccurate throw, if they bailed out from a clean pocket, whether or not they missed any open reads, whether they made a high level throw into a tight window, whether they had to create yardage if a play broke down, like trying to track all the things that the quarterback controls, right? And I haven't done that with him. So I couldn't give you a specific one. One thing I do know, Shanahan's quarterbacks consistently do very well. Like we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo now outside of the confines of Shanahan's offense, particularly with this group of playmakers he has now, and we saw what that looked like, and it wasn't good. And so it's almost impossible to judge Purdy on his own merits, but we've also seen him make some really tough throws. We've seen him create some yards, make some tight window throws. We've seen him with some really great scrambles. What we've seen a lot the last couple of weeks is him having 3 pretty bad quarters and then doing enough at the end of the game to win. And some people like to say, like, well, all that matters is what you do at the end. Not if you're down 20. And that's the thing, is you can't credit the quarterback for keeping the game close while he was playing badly. And that's just one of those things where it's like, well, why do you think that? It kind of started at the beginning. And so I do think that he's overall played well this year. I do think the talks of him as a potential, and I think he was nominated for an MVP, and Mahomes wasn't. And that's insane. And not just because I'm a homer for Mahomes, but because the reality is Patrick Mahomes is clearly objectively significantly more valuable to his team, whereas Purdy is not. Like, he is valuable to his team, but like there's a dozen teams in the league that would refuse to trade their quarterback for Brock Purdy, even if they pay more. The Chiefs wouldn't trade Mahomes for literally anything a team offered. The Bills could offer Josh Allen and 10 first-round picks, and the Chiefs wouldn't do it. Like, that's one way to measure it. So I think Purdy seems like he's played really well all season. He's been not great the last 2 weeks, and Steve Spagnuolo's defense has been excellent. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see. Had Lamar Jackson throwing his helmet and getting very upset. So we'll see how it goes. I'm really curious about that because Shanahan's offense is so great, and Purdy has shown a willingness to stand in there and make tough throws. But this is his first time really doing this. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to watch. I have no idea what to expect from him.
Well, and you mentioned Spagnuolo.
Spags, yes.
Spags running a 4-3 base defense with multiple blitz packages. It seems like and actually I was looking at Steve Wilks, the 49ers defensive coordinator, and they seem to sort of maybe it's just indicative of a trend in the NFL as being very blitz happy. It seems like both they have kind of similar styles as coordinators. Mm-hmm. But how do you think that Spagnuolo is going to counter this? Whatever you want to call it, a 3 or 4 headed beast of the 49ers with so many weapons available, not only in the pass game but also in the running game.
I think they're going to probably try to do something similar to what they've done against other high-level offenses this year. Probably have L'Jarius Sneed follow around, I'm guessing, Debo, and press him at the line and try to get him frustrated and take him out of the game. The advantage the Chiefs have is they have 2 of the best 5 corners in the NFL. L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie are both unbelievable. Great tacklers, exceptional blitzers, really sticky in coverage. And so what I'm guessing he's probably going to do is think, okay, we can't necessarily stop these playmakers, but what we can do is mess with the quarterback. Yeah. And that's generally what his thing is. So what Spags loves to do that separates him from a lot of defensive coordinators is he mixes up his looks on the back end, in that pre-snap, what he'll show is 2 safeties over the top and showing some obvious man coverage looks, and then right before the ball is snapped, he'll have guys rotate into a single high look where they're playing cover 6 on one side of the field. And it makes the quarterback not know what he's facing, which makes the play call questionable. And so what I think he's going to do is try to stop downfield attacks with those types of looks. They rotate a lot into 2 high looks, but they get there in different ways. They may have a boundary quarterback or cornerback rotate all the way back to be a deep safety. He does all these things to where the quarterback can't trust what he's seeing pre and post snap. Mm-hmm. And then he's going to try to trust his guys to rally and tackle for all the horizontal stuff the Niners do. Yeah. And they've been great at it this year because their corners tackle so well. Whether it'll work against a team like this, it's hard to say. They have a great offense.
What games would you say that the Niners are going to be studying for teams that, maybe losses that the Chiefs experienced this year, that where the other team did a particularly good job of attacking or figuring out this type of defensive approach? The
only even semi-tough game, the Chiefs they've allowed 27 points once this year. Every other game has been 20 or less for the most part.
Yeah.
Their defense they've had one bad game, and that was against LaFleur's Packers. And so they struggle at times with dealing with designed quarterback runs. They struggle at times dealing with play action bootleg looks, stuff like that. Yeah. And those are the things that I think from under center, bootleg, play action type stuff, that's the stuff that Shanahan should be looking to incorporate. The thing is, that's not often what he does. And so there's this push-pull there in terms of, do you dance with the one that brung you, or do you try to adapt? Mm-hmm. Because really, LaFleur is the only coach that really got the better of Spags this year. And so that's the game I'd be looking at if I were them.
McCaffrey, how do the Chiefs deal with him?
I think it's just a rally and tackle and know that odds are another team can't beat Patrick Mahomes just by running the ball. It's not consistent enough. And that's everyone says, oh, you play keep away and that kind of stuff. That's what you do. The problem is your defense has to do it too then, right? Because otherwise what happens, let's say you have this, 7-minute, 13-play scoring drive that ends in a field goal. But, man, did you keep the ball away from them? And then the Chiefs score in 5 plays and a minute and a half. So the only way keep away works in the NFL is if you actually lower the number of possessions by each team. Yeah. And that's hard to do because your defense has to do it as well. And the problem with running the ball over and over, even if your running back's averaging 5 yards per carry, it's not like it's 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It's, oh, man, first run was 10. Second run was 11. Oh, the second one was -2.
Yeah.
And now it's 2nd and 12, and we can't run.
Yeah.
And so I think the Chiefs, I'm guessing the Niners will have some success running the ball earlier because the Chiefs have basically, except up until the Ravens game, have let teams run on them a little more. Basically saying, we can rally and tackle well enough that your drive will eventually stall out. You'll have a holding penalty. You will, you'll trip on a blocker's foot. Running the ball is so much more difficult than passing the ball. Now, in a Shanahan offense, there's a chance one of those might be a 70-yard touchdown. And so it'll be interesting to see because they really emphasize stopping the run against the Ravens and then defending the perimeter against the Dolphins in the run game. Mm-hmm. So you might see them put an emphasis on that and say, we don't think your quarterback can beat us too, which would be kind of fun to watch.
I mean, you take Mahomes as obviously, I would say obviously, but maybe others would disagree with me as being sort of like the best player in the game.
Well, they'd be wrong if they disagreed.
But I mean, I think what a lot of the spin that I've seen on this coming into it is that basically this is going to boil down to a coaching matchup because the teams are pretty even in terms of both offense and defense. Shanahan against Reed.
I think it's much more. I would frame it as Shanahan against Spags and Reed against Wilkes.
Okay.
Because really, Andy's not going to be calling the defense. And that's going to be the big thing. And to answer your question before you even got there, I think the Chiefs have an advantage there. I've watched a little of the Niners defense. Maybe they'll change things up. I don't know. But there's a reason the Lions and the Packers before that were running and passing the ball all over them. They've got good personnel, but they're a very static defense. They do not change their looks very much. Like what I was describing Spags does on the back end, the Niners don't do a ton of disguises. And I just got to say, unless they execute better than almost any team I've seen, generally speaking, if you don't disguise your looks with Patrick Mahomes, he's going to throw for like 400 yards on you. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be unless their front four can get so much pressure. And that seems to be what they rely on. The last time the Chiefs played the Niners, they put Nick Bosa in a torture chamber of jet sweeps and screens and things that had him spinning all over the place to where he never knew when he could rush the passer. And I think Reed's going to do that to them again in all likelihood.
Didn't they also, the Niners, don't they have the guy that was originally drafted by Washington to like Chase Young? Chase Young, yeah.
Yep, and he's gone there. It hasn't quite made the impact people were hoping for. I don't know if he's playing hurt or what.
Okay.
But they've got a great line. They've got Hargrave, Armstead, Young, and Bosa. On paper, that is terrifying.
Right.
And so that's what they have to hope is that front four can dominate the game.
Yeah. Okay. The opening line has the Chiefs as the underdog in this game.
Nobody believes in them. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's just a travesty.
And
it's a sham. It's a mockery. It's a Travis-a-mockery.
1.5 dogs. And then 47.5 over-under, which I guess suggests more of a defensive game.
I suppose, like 27-20.
Yeah. I mean, I always, these odds makers are just amazing how they are able to so accurately predict what's going to happen in these things.
They got a lot of money at stake.
Yeah, right.
know?
They do. And so.
And Vegas always wins.
Right.
Like Vegas always wins.
Yeah. And I mean, gambling is another topic that we probably aren't going to be able to get into today. But I mean, the impact that gambling has had on the NFL. But, okay, so I'm going to ask basically 3 more questions because I know we're kind of getting up here on time. But
sure.
First one's kind of fun. So I got to ask, of course, what impact is Taylor Swift going to have on this football game?
I think she is going to make a bunch of people with too much time on their hands very angry when they cut to her for, 10 whole seconds, which they do with celebrities all the time.
Yeah.
This happens at every sporting event.
Uh-huh.
I understand it's Taylor Swift, but if people think the NFL isn't going to take advantage of the most famous woman in the world, dating one of the best players in the game, it's a business. Right. Of course they're going to advertise it. I've had people that they call themselves Swifties email me and DM me and subscribe based on they want to learn about the game, and I'm writing about Travis Kelce. It's a good thing. It changes the dynamic, but I mean, other than that, she's not going to have any effect on the game whatsoever.
Is your wife a Taylor Swift fan?
She is not a Swiftie, but she's a Taylor Swift fan. She listens to her songs. Jazz kind of leans towards a little more melancholy music sometimes, which occasionally freaks me out a little bit. Because I walk in, and I hear her, we are never, ever, ever. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, she doesn't listen to that song. But
okay.
I mean, she likes the way that the genres have changed, and that's kind of fun. Yeah. And so she and I have had fun, I sent her a video clip of Kelsey and Taylor Swift post game, of them approaching each other in silence, and I was like, did that hot mic catch him saying that he loves her? And we're pretty sure it did, actually.
Oh,
I know. I have not heard anyone say it anywhere, and I actually haven't tweeted about it or anything or said anything even as a joke, because they're two adults. That's between them. But it is interesting that no one has said anything, but I'm pretty sure he said he loved her.
Ooh, okay.
Well, and she's
been patiently sitting in here listening to this interview the whole time. So, but I don't think she wants to give an opinion on that personally. Okay. The second to last question is one I ask every week: what advice do you give to Caleb?
Do I give to Caleb?
Yeah.
The poor Caleb's had to endure listening to unsolicited advice from me.
Caleb is our sort of stereotypical
years.
Young rebellious youth.
Oh my goodness, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Caleb is about as unstereotypical as almost anyone I've met his age. Man, I think it's again this poor guy, because his dad and I are good friends. He's had to listen to unsolicited advice from me for years. And so it wouldn't be anything I haven't said to him before, but I think the biggest thing would be that in terms of what you're looking to do, because it's usually career advice, right? You think of if you're giving advice to a young man, it's just, be willing to have success incrementally, and then just be ready for those moments when it won't be incremental, because there'll be a jump. And if you're doing the same thing and you're pushing over and over in these little small moments, when that opportunity hits because you're already pushing, you'll make that jump. Whereas if you're not always pushing, that opportunity might be there and you just miss it. And so beyond that, the only other thing I would say to any young man, marry a Proverbs 31 wife, and everything else kind of falls into place.
Is that the...
when Jazz met me, I was working at a Pomida, living on my sister's couch, making $7.50 an hour.
Yeah.
And so... it's the classic George H.W. Bush. You ever hear this story?
No.
Where he was with his wife. I can't remember her name right now, off the top of my head. So anyway, they're driving through some town in Texas. Of course, they have a driver, and when they get there, she recognizes the guy pumping their gas. Obviously different time. This is the early '90s or the time when HW was president, and she recognized him. Gets out, oh hi, it's so good to see you, and they talk about it for a little bit. Oh, this is my husband George. They get in. And turns out she dated this guy back in high school, or some maybe high school, maybe college. I can't remember when. And they're driving away, and of course George H.W. But he's feeling pretty good about himself. Mm-hmm. It's bet you're pretty glad you found me, didn't marry that guy who's there pumping gas. And without missing a beat, and this is the story, without missing a beat, she goes, "Oh honey, don't be silly. If I'd married him, he'd be president." Oh, and it's such a great line, and there's so much truth to it, because. Boom. There's so much truth to it that you marry the right woman, and everything becomes so much easier.
Would you say Proverbs 31?
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking more along the lines of the other proverb where it says it's better to live on your roof than to live inside the house with a brawling woman.
Well, yeah, with a brawling woman or quarrelsome woman, depending on your translation. And that's
we're talking the real Bible, the King James version.
Sure. Well, absolutely. A second act of grace occurred in 1611. All that fun stuff. So Like, but no, really, it becomes so many people. And like, I mean, if a young woman asked me, I'd say, no, marry the right guy.
Yeah.
Like, don't make your life harder than it has to be. Find someone who's an actual partner, someone who carries you through tough things. Jazz basically carried me through law school while our middle child was very, very sick, and it was so hard, and she did it. Mm-hmm. And so, like, if you have someone who can pick up the slack in those hard moments, who like genuinely believes in you and genuinely helps you, it just makes everything. It's like you're living life on a cheat code. It's like I tell people, like like having my parents. Mm-hmm. Like I've lived my life with so many cheat codes because of the people that I've had in my life. So those I have no idea if any of that's helpful at all. You're welcome, Caleb.
Up, down, down, left, right, BA, select, start. You know,
start, select.
Oh,
no,
start.
I'm kidding.
I think
You're right.
pretty sure
you're
select,
right.
start.
You're right.
Okay. My final question is, what are your Super Bowl plans this year?
I actually need to call my older sister Sarah about that, just to double check and be sure that we're going to travel to watch with them. What we've hosted the last 3 Super Bowls that the Chiefs have been in, and my family's always come over, and it's just been really special memories. There's a video clip out there, the first Super Bowl that the Chiefs won. And it's just such a cool clip. Everyone's celebrating, and I started crying. It was a whole deal. Yeah. Like sang to the floor crying. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And so that I think is probably the plan.
Okay.
And it's gonna be a lot of fun, win or lose.
I'll tag this on there. What will be on the menu?
Oh, man, I don't even know. I gotta lose weight.
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing buffalo chicken dip with chips. I'm guessing some pizza. Yeah. You know, we're a simple folk.
Yeah. Okay.
It's gonna be Swiftie themed. Oh, for the love of
God. Wow. Okay. All right.
Oh, my goodness. See, this is why there's certain pieces of information you shouldn't even come to me for. I'm like, I don't know. I think we'll probably heat up some pizza rolls. Delicious.
Okay. Well, I hope that you have a great Super Bowl.
Thank you.
That that the Chiefs and the Niners play a great game. I'm not gonna.
I hope it's terribly boring.
You know,
I hope it's 35.
May the best team win.
No, may the Chiefs win. I don't care who's better. I hope the Chiefs win no matter what. I hope even if they play like garbage, they win. And I hope for the most boring game in history. I hope that the second half I hope I get to take a nap in the second half. It's so boring.
Seth,
in a good way.
Well, I will say this, that I would like the Chiefs to win because I know that it'll make you happy.
Hey, thanks, man.
When you're happy, I'm happy.
Oh,
so,
you know what? Well, that's why you're a good friend.
Yeah. All right. My guest has been Seth Keysor. Thank you, Seth. And also, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and like and even comment. That would be something, right? If somebody would comment on anything other than my weight or appearance. Thank you.
And my weight or appearance.
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
It's been a pleasure, Seth.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks.